Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A gypsy woman with an infant, abandoned in the midst of a blizzard, knocked on the surgeon's door. He sheltered them for the night, but in the morning, when he looked into the room of his sick son, he gasped. "Please, open up. Please." A loud, desperate woman's voice rang out behind the front door, overpowering the faint sound of a child crying. German, a 35-year-old surgeon, was sitting on the edge of the couch in the living room and nearly dropped his cup of cold coffee. Throughout the night, he thought he heard strange noises, as if someone was knocking or calling from outside, but the storm howled so fiercely around the house that it was impossible to tell what was real. Now, however, the sound was unmistakable. Someone was truly standing at his door, pleading for help and banging desperately. German jumped up, set the cup on the armrest, and rushed toward the hallway. For a brief second, he thought, in such a storm, no one would be outside without a serious reason. Maybe there was an accident on the road, maybe someone got lost in the blizzard. Or maybe someone fell and now urgently needs medical help. "I'm coming," he called out, quickly checking that the key was still in the lock. He cracked the door open, and a blast of cold wind burst into the warm house. Before him stood a young woman wrapped in a large, dark blanket. Beside her, on the snow-covered porch, was a wet bag. In her arms, she clutched a tiny child, who was sobbing and gasping for air. The sharp wind flung snow into both German's and the stranger's faces, and the child seemed ready to thrust his tiny hands into any crevice to escape the freezing flakes. "I'm sorry," she gasped, breathing heavily. "Please, let us stay for the night. We got stuck on the road, no one would take us in. Please, for God's sake, help us." German knew that around here people often treated gypsies with suspicion or even hostility. But he was a doctor, trained to help anyone without prejudice, and even if he hadn't been, he could never have slammed the door in their faces. The scene before him was simply too desperate. "Come in, quickly," he said, stepping back and gesturing for her to enter. "Careful, the threshold is high." The woman nodded gratefully. Despite her dire situation, she seemed to be trying to maintain her composure. But after struggling through snowdrifts all night, she swayed from exhaustion. She bent down, grabbed the bag, hugged the baby tighter, and stepped inside. German immediately shut the door to keep out the wind and snow, locking it again. Then he quickly pulled his coat from the rack. "Here, let me help you. We'll find something dry and warm for you," he muttered, handing her a shawl while glancing at the child. "How is he?" "Cold, so cold," he cried the whole way, she managed to say, wrapping the baby in the offered coat. Thank you so much." She was too exhausted and frightened to explain more. German noticed her youthful face, barely older than 20, already shadowed by deep lines of fatigue, despair, and worry. Her dark, large eyes were strikingly serious. Wooden bead bracelets, typical for gypsies, adorned her wrists. Under the torn, snow-soaked hem of her skirt, he saw her frozen legs and worn-out boots. "Come further in," German said, pointing toward a room where the light was on. "It's warmer there. I'll put the kettle on. You and the baby need to warm up." The woman hesitated but clutched the baby tightly and walked down the corridor. German caught a glimpse of the child's face, a boy, definitely, still sobbing weakly, his strength nearly spent. A cold feeling crept into German's gut. A baby shouldn't get this cold. Severe complications could arise if his body temperature dropped too low. "Sit on the couch," German said, grabbing a blanket from a closet. "I'll bring some towels too. You both need drying off." The woman, whose name, he would later learn, was Ines, carefully sat on the edge of the couch. She looked ready to faint from cold and exhaustion. German hurried into the next room, where he kept a storage closet and first aid kit, grabbing several towels. As he moved, he heard a coughing fit upstairs, his own 12-year-old son, Victor. Is all this noise waking him? German paused, listening. But the coughing stopped, and it seemed Victor had fallen back asleep. His son had been battling severe breathing problems lately, a bronchitis flare-up worsened by a weakened immune system, and German had been trying to balance work with caring for him. His worry for Victor gnawed at him constantly, but he couldn't abandon the woman and her child, who were in immediate danger. Back in the living room, he handed Ines the towels. She said nothing, exhaustion seemed to choke every word, but she accepted his help gratefully. German filled the kettle and set it to boil. I'll warm up some water. You need to drink some hot tea, and the baby should too, if he can. What's his name? Alejandro, she whispered, bending over the boy. He's 1 year old. Tomorrow he turns exactly 1. For a moment, her face changed, realizing how important the coming days should have been, and how miserable this moment was instead. The child continued to whimper softly as she gently wiped his face and hands with a towel. German nodded and placed a basin of hot water in front of her so she could warm her hands and rub the child's cold limbs. He noticed Alejandro's eyelids fluttering, his frightened gaze darting around. His skin was pale, and his lips were slightly blue, clear signs of hypothermia. Let me have a look, German offered, sitting beside her and carefully taking the baby into his arms. I'm a doctor, a surgeon, actually. But that's not important now. I just need to check his breathing and temperature. Ines nodded again, leaning toward him, though a flicker of distrust flashed in her eyes. German worked with steady, calm hands. He gently pulled aside the tight blanket, placed his hand on the baby's chest, listened to his breathing, touched his forehead, and checked his pupil reactions to the light. Looks like he's badly chilled, German said, trying to sound reassuring. But if we warm him up and get some fluids into him, he should recover. There are no injuries, no wounds. No, Ines whispered, shaking her head. We just walked a long way. They kicked us off the bus. The driver said his shift was over. We didn't know what to do. We started walking, then the blizzard hit. We tried to find a hotel or any shelter, but everyone chased us away. At these last words, her lips trembled. She squeezed her eyes shut and wiped away tears from her cheeks. It was clear how brutally hard this night had been for her. German frowned. It infuriated him that someone could throw a woman and a tiny child out into a violent storm. People can be cruel and frightened, he said, but you're safe now. Do you have any warm clothes left in your bag? Maybe you could change into something drier? Not much that's warm, Ines said, lowering her eyes in embarrassment. But I'll change into what I have. Good. I'll bring you one of my old sweaters and some pants. Rub the child warm for now. Later, I'll find something for him too. I still have some of my son's old clothes from when he was little. They'll be too big, he's 12 now, but we'll manage. The woman smiled through her tears. German got up and went upstairs to the bedroom where he kept Victor's things. His son was still asleep, but when German entered the room, he noticed the boy's forehead was sweaty, and his breathing was uneven. Damn, German thought, looks like his fever's back. Concern tightened his chest. He approached, adjusted the blanket so it wouldn't slip off, and checked the medicine kit for the antipyretics and antibiotics the pediatrician had prescribed. German could have prescribed them himself, but he preferred to consult colleagues when it came to pediatrics, a specialty of its own. Trying not to wake his son, he picked out some old children's pajamas he had kept for sentimental reasons. They could now be useful for little Alejandro. Better to have him running around in clothes that are too big than stay in wet ones, German decided. He also grabbed a pair of warm flannel pants and a thick sweater for Ines. They wouldn't fit her perfectly, but at least they were dry. He wanted to stay longer and watch Victor, to be sure there were no complications, but downstairs a freezing child was waiting, and the woman needed help too. I'll come check on you later, Victor, he thought, covering his son more securely. Victor stirred slightly but didn't wake. When German came downstairs, he found Ines in the same spot, but now she had removed her wet outer clothes and was rubbing the child down with warm water from a basin. Red marks showed faintly on her arms, the skin burning from severe chilling. A light steam rose from the water, and cups of tea were already set on the table. She must have found the kitchen supplies while he was upstairs, trying to be useful rather than idle. Here, try these, German said, handing her the sweater and pants. And for the child, this pajama might work. It's a little big, but it's all I have right now. Thank you so much, you're very kind, whispered Ines as she took the clothes. At least it's something warm. I'll return everything as soon as, she trailed off, remembering she had neither money nor a way to repay him. But German just waved her off. That's nothing. Right now, saving your baby from hypothermia is what's important. And you need to warm up, too. Don't think about the rest. She smiled again, and German looked away, feeling awkward under the weight of her gratitude, perhaps greater than anything he had experienced before. He sat beside her and helped dress Alejandro in the oversized pajamas. The boy was crying less now, looking thoughtfully at the unfamiliar man who was handling his tiny hands. When German offered him a warm bottle of water, heated and mixed with some baby tea he found among his supplies, the child eagerly started sipping. Let him drink a little at a time, and then, if you have any food for him, feed him. If not, I can cook some porridge. I still have some baby supplies left. My son's tastes have changed, of course, but some things remain. Ines shook her head gratefully. We have very little food with us, just a couple of jars of baby food, in the bag. I'll check later. Thank you. She pulled the curtain over the window to block out the blizzard outside. Then she quietly sat down on the floor next to the basin to wash her own feet. Meanwhile, German slipped away into the kitchen to make her a proper cup of coffee. The stove was still warm. In a pot in the corner, he found some leftover soup. He reheated it, deciding both the woman and the child needed to eat. He set the soup and some bread on the table and invited Ines and Alejandro to eat. The boy, now a bit warmer, was dozing in his pajamas, wide-eyed but calmer. Ines looked like it was the first time in days she could sit somewhere warm, relax, and feel safe. Eat, German said, sliding the plate toward her, and I'll go check on my son. Then we can talk about what's next. You needed to travel somewhere tomorrow, right? Ines nodded awkwardly. Yes, we were heading to the big city, hoping to meet some relatives. But she hesitated, embarrassed, we're not sure where we'll stay yet. It was clear she was reluctant to reveal too much of her story, but German didn't press. Instead, he laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry. Stay here tonight. We'll sort everything out in the morning. If necessary, I'll drive you into the city. For now, just rest. Ines wanted to say thank you again but held back, instead giving German a look full of awe, as if she were seeing a miracle. German, used to being a lifeline in emergencies, felt only a simple, natural urge to help. Leaving Ines and Alejandro warm and safe, he went upstairs to check on Victor. His breathing was steadier now, but his forehead was still hot. German gently woke him to give him medicine. Dad, Victor moaned, opening his eyes slightly, why is it so noisy downstairs? We have guests, German said softly. Go back to sleep, son. We'll talk tomorrow. Just take your medicine now. Victor grimaced but swallowed the bitter syrup. German checked his pulse, propped up his pillow, and monitored him for a few minutes. His temperature was 38.4 degrees Celsius, high, but not critical. It'll go down by morning, German thought, and if not, we'll head to the hospital. Stroking his son's hair, he left the nightlight on and quietly left the room. In the hallway, his gaze lingered briefly on an old photo, himself, his wife Blanca, and a young Victor. German had been only 25 then, just starting his practice. Blanca had passed away a few years ago after a long illness, and since then, he had raised Victor alone. Sometimes his mother helped, but mostly, German managed everything himself. The memory of Blanca made his heart ache, but he had learned to live with the pain. Work, his son, and his patients kept him moving forward. Back downstairs, he saw that Ines had finished the soup, and Alejandro was asleep, nestled against her. The coffee cup was nearly empty. Ines looked exhausted but a little warmer, her long dark hair still damp. Thank you, she said, without lifting her gaze from her son. I feel much better. And Alejandro, he stopped crying. Good. I'll make up a bed for you in the next room. There's a fold-out couch. You'll sleep beside him so he feels secure. Inés stood up, carrying Alejandro. I'm sorry if I barged into your home too boldly, she said quietly. We truly didn't know where else to go, and no one else opened their door. It's all right. I told you, I'm glad to help, German answered, keeping his voice soft and calm. Let me show you where you can sleep. He led her to a small room on the ground floor, usually his office and occasional bedroom when he didn't want to disturb Victor. There was a couch that unfolded into a proper bed. German made it up with clean sheets, pillows, and warm blankets. Settle in, he said. If you need anything, I'll be upstairs. My son's name is Victor. He's 12 and currently ill. If you hear coughing, don't be alarmed. I'll buy groceries tomorrow so you and the little one will have plenty to eat. Inés nodded, laying the child down. Alejandro opened his mouth slightly in his sleep inside, as if he, too, felt safer now. Inés pressed her hands to her heart, lifting her gaze to the ceiling as if silently thanking heaven for German's kindness. He understood the gesture and gave a small, shy smile, unaccustomed to such open gratitude. Usually patients just said thank you, doctor, after surgery, but this was different. He wished her good night and gently closed the door. In the living room, German listened to the blizzard howling outside. Snow rattled against the windows, the wind whistled. He reflected on how fragile human life could be. Just days ago he had performed a complicated surgery, saving a life from peritonitis, and now fate had dropped a young woman and her baby at his door, almost swept away by the storm. Such events weren't rare, yet each time they struck him anew. At last, he went upstairs, checked on Victor again. His son slept soundly. German sat on the edge of the bed, listening to his breathing. He needed rest himself. Tomorrow was his day off, thankfully. He would have to buy more medicine and probably help Inés and Alejandro too. His mind was buzzing with thoughts, and he didn't notice when he fell asleep. He dreamed a strange dream, walking down a hospital corridor, meeting Inés carrying Alejandro and Victor, holding their hands. They all smiled, while German couldn't speak a word. Then he saw Blanca, whispering something he couldn't make out. Outside, the blizzard howled, but through the noise, he heard a child's soft laughter. In the morning, he was woken by a strange sound, something like a sob, a cry, or a knock. Then a quiet female voice said, "Hey, wait, Alejandro, don't go there." German realized it was almost 9 o'clock, and muffled children's babble was coming from downstairs. Stretching sleepily, he made his way down. His heart skipped a beat. He was about to check on Victor, but there was also a growing, strange sense of unease. What if something had happened? However, in the living room he saw a charming scene. Little Alejandro, who had already become quite comfortable, was waddling slowly across the carpet on his unsteady legs, clearly enjoying the new space. Inés was trying to keep him from heading toward the stairs. When she noticed German, she froze. "Good morning," the surgeon croaked, his throat still half asleep. "Good morning," Inés replied with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry we woke you." Alejandro got up very early. German smiled. Little children rarely let anyone sleep in. But just then, Victor appeared in the hallway doorway, wrapped in a blanket. He stood there, looking at them with some confusion. His cheeks were slightly pink, and his eyes shone, as if his fever had gone down, though maybe not completely. "Dad, who is that?" the boy asked in a half-whisper, as if he still couldn't believe his eyes. "These are our guests," German answered. "This is Inés and her son Alejandro. They stayed overnight because they got caught in a heavy snowstorm." Victor coughed but smiled and stepped forward, clearly intrigued by the little one. Alejandro, seeing a new person, grinned, revealing a few tiny teeth, then plopped back down onto the floor with a wobble. Victor watched him with curiosity. "Hi. Why are you so tiny?" Victor asked playfully, giving a restrained wink so as not to scare the child. Ines looked at Victor with clear gratitude. She had probably been worried that their sudden appearance might disturb the family's routine. However, judging by Victor's expression, he was more curious than anything else. "I'll make breakfast," German suggested. "Why don't you sit with Alejandro for a while, if you don't mind? Ines, would you like to help? We can cut some bread, boil some eggs." Of course, she readily agreed. "I'll just put Alejandro in a room so he doesn't run all over the house." "Leave him here," Victor interjected, crouching down in front of the little one. "He seems to want to explore. I'll keep an eye on him." Ines hesitated, then nodded. Indeed, Alejandro started fiddling with the edge of the carpet, trying to pull at a loose thread, glancing occasionally at Victor as if inviting him to join in a game. German smiled. His son clearly had an interest in little kids, though he didn't have much experience with them. In the kitchen, Ines began helping but moved a little uncertainly, constantly glancing toward the living room, worried something might happen to Alejandro. German showed her where the pots were, how to turn on the stove, and they got to work. He noticed that she seemed calmer than she had been the night before, but there was still a certain tension in her eyes, as if she were used to living on high alert, ready to flee or defend herself at any moment. From time to time, she threw anxious glances out the window, where the snow had almost stopped falling, though the wind still howled. She was probably wondering how much longer they would have to stay in a stranger's house. "You don't need to rush," German said while slicing bread. "If you have nowhere urgent to go, stay as long as you need. And if you need help with transportation, after breakfast I'm driving into town. I can give you a ride." Ines nodded tightly. It seemed she wanted to say something, to confide in him, but something was holding her back. German decided not to press her. He knew how hard it could be for someone in a difficult situation to trust a complete stranger. When breakfast was almost ready, German put the kettle on and went to call Victor and Alejandro to the table. What he saw made him pause with a smile. Victor was sitting on the floor, while Alejandro, breathing heavily, was scrambling onto his lap, trying to climb higher. Victor, smiling, cupped his hands around the child to protect him from falling. Suddenly, Alejandro shrieked loudly, flailing his arms. Victor flinched slightly but wasn't scared. Instead, he crouched lower to be at Alejandro's level. In that moment, Alejandro grabbed a handful of his t-shirt and gave it a mighty tug, nearly pulling Victor forward. "Hey, careful." Victor laughed. "You almost made me drop you, little guy." German felt his heart squeeze warmly. He was happy to see his son, even for a moment, distracted from his pain and behaving so freely. Recently, Victor had often withdrawn, exhausted by constant coughing fits and weakness. But now there was a spark of life and energy in him, even though he still looked tired. "Breakfast is ready," German said. "Victor, make sure you wear slippers, the floor's cold. Alejandro should have socks too." "Okay, Dad," Victor smiled and carefully passed Alejandro into German's arms. At first, the toddler tensed up at the unfamiliar touch, but then, recognizing German, relaxed and kept smiling. And so the three of them headed to the kitchen. Ines had already set out plates and bread. As soon as she saw Victor carrying both a plate of porridge and a cup of coffee, she rushed to take the cup from him, afraid he might burn himself. But Victor shrugged. "I'm not that little anymore. I can handle it." "Sorry," Ines said softly. "I didn't mean to hover." "It's fine," Victor replied. "I'm actually kind of curious," he added, glancing at Alejandro, who was now sitting in a high chair, a leftover from when German's nephew used to visit. After breakfast, Ines offered to wash the dishes. German was about to refuse but decided to let her help, understanding that it probably made her feel a little less like a burden. Meanwhile, he took Victor aside and checked his temperature, 37.2 degrees Celsius. Better than during the night. The medicine was working. "Son, just rest in the living room for now. I'll go to the pharmacy. Want to watch some TV? Can I hang out with Alejandro instead?" Victor glanced over at the little one chewing on a bread crust. Just don't overexert yourself. You're still weak. But sure, you can sit with him, German agreed. At that moment, Ines approached, drying her hands on a towel. German, you mentioned you're going to town. Could I ask you to give us a ride somewhere? She asked hesitantly, as if bracing for a refusal. Of course, German said. After the pharmacy, I can drive you wherever you need. I just don't want to leave Victor alone for too long, but I think he'll manage for an hour or two. I can ask a neighbor, a nurse, to check in on him, or I'll leave him a phone to call me if needed. Thank you. We need to get to the bus station, or maybe to some of my relatives. But I'm not sure where they are right now. They might have already left, Ines said, her face clouding with uncertainty. We'll figure it out. Let's go together, German offered. Victor, want me to bring you anything? I'm good, the boy replied. Maybe just some juice or something tasty if you can. German chuckled and patted him on the shoulder. You got it. Just don't run around too much. Watch your cough. Hearing about the cough, Ines looked at Victor with concern and asked, Would you like me to bring you some herbal tea? I know a few mixes that help with coughs. I'm fine, Victor said with an embarrassed shrug. But German noticed that, although his son grumbled, he appreciated the attention. And he thought it might actually be good for Victor to see that there were people who simply cared about him without asking anything in return. About an hour later, German, Ines, and Alejandro were driving along a broken, snow-covered road toward town. The wind had calmed, and the snowfall had almost stopped, but the roads were still full of drifts and icy patches. German drove carefully, weaving around snowbanks. They were heading to the nearest settlement, where there was a pharmacy and a couple of grocery stores, planning to make their way to the main bus station after that. Ines sat in the front seat, holding Alejandro close. The child kept dozing off, then waking with a start from the car's jolts, babbling in his baby language. German glanced at them from time to time, thinking how hard it must be for her to raise a son alone, on the road. Why did she end up in this situation, he wondered. May I ask where you were originally heading? German asked cautiously as they drove onto a less snow-covered road. We were supposed to meet my uncle, Ines replied with some hesitation. He promised to help us find work, and, you know, it's very hard being alone with a child. Of course, I understand, German nodded. And this uncle of yours lives somewhere around here? He used to work at fairs, traveling from city to city, selling fabrics and jewelry. Now he's supposedly settled in our regional capital. I haven't been in touch with him for several months, and his phone is out of service. He told me to come when I was ready. But I didn't have money to rent a place. So, I set out as best as I could. I see. And, may I ask? German hesitated, unsure how to tactfully inquire about her family or the child's father. I'm raising Alejandro alone, Ines said, catching his meaning. His father moved to another city before he was even born. He didn't really want to take responsibility for us. German was silent for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He understood all too well how often men abandon their partners and children, leaving them with nothing. Everyone lives as they can, but it doesn't make it any less bitter for those left behind. It must be hard for you, he said finally. It is, Ines admitted, lowering her eyes. I've gotten used to being chased away, like last night. She mimicked someone's rough voice, gypsy girl. Then added, but I have no other path. German only nodded silently. He really couldn't imagine what it was like to live constantly facing rejection. Meanwhile, a thought was already spinning in his head. Maybe she needed more substantial help. Maybe he could arrange something with someone about a place to stay. But he didn't dare to offer anything yet to a woman he barely knew. When they reached a pharmacy in a nearby village, German pulled over, leaving the engine running so the car wouldn't get cold. He went in and bought medicines for Victor, several packs of fever reducers, anti-inflammatory drugs, and a few other things that might come in handy. Ines stayed in the car, watching him with gratitude and a hint of envy. It was obvious she understood that German had resources, a job, stability, while she had just a couple of hundred in her pocket. Next, they stopped at a small grocery store where German picked up some supplies: bread, milk, vegetables, cereals, baby food. At first, Ines was afraid he was buying all of this for her and Alejandro, but German explained, "I have a son too, and now you and your child. So one way or another, we'll eat it all. Don't worry. Besides, my fridge at home was almost empty. I've been spending all my time at work lately. Time to restock." As they loaded the groceries into the car, Ines said shyly, "German, thank you for everything. I feel so awkward. You even bought food, and You can bake me some pancakes later, and we'll call it even," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm not very good at pancakes," she smiled, for the first time almost cheerfully, "but in our camp, we have other recipes. I can make a meat flatbread." "Perfect. It'll be a great opportunity to learn something new," German winked. He then started the engine and headed toward the city limits, where the bus station was located. The drive took another half an hour. During that time, Ines tried calling her uncle's old number several times, but no one answered. German felt sorry for her. He figured the uncle had probably left for work somewhere else, and the number was no longer active. "All right, let's check it out," he said when he parked by the bus station. "Maybe you have his address?" "Yes, he said he was staying with a friend at 17 Novaya Street. I asked around, but it seems different people live there all the time. Let's go and have a look." However, when they arrived, it turned out the house had been demolished long ago, and a new parking lot was being built in its place. The security guard at the gate just swore when German asked if he had heard of such a person. When asked how long ago the house had been torn down, the guard replied, "About 2 years ago. They started back at the beginning of winter, finished off this fall." Hearing this, Ines pressed her lips tightly together to keep from crying. She whispered, "So, he's not here anymore. We have to go back." German saw the despair in her eyes and thought, where would she even go? Returning to the bus station made no sense. She didn't have money for another ticket, and wandering into the unknown with a baby was pointless. He pictured her ending up on the street again with the child. "Ines," he said cautiously once they were back in the car, "you can stay at my place for now. Our house isn't small, there's room. And Victor, I think, would even be happy to have a little buddy around. But I'm not insisting, just offering so you don't have to be out in the cold." She shook her head, as if not believing what she heard. "I can't take advantage of your kindness. You've already helped us so much." "It's not taking advantage," German assured her. "I'll feel better knowing you're safe. Meanwhile, you can look for work. Maybe I'll ask around, someone might have a part-time job for you." Ines was nearly in tears, overwhelmed by gratitude and uncertainty. She glanced at her little boy, who, sensing her tension, started fidgeting in her lap and making unhappy noises. "You see," she whispered, "if we don't find work, I don't know what will happen to us. But I can't keep wandering aimlessly. Alejandro is too young to live on handouts." German just nodded. "That's exactly why you should stay at my place until you figure things out. I'm not asking for rent. Just help out around the house a bit, and we'll see. Maybe we'll find you a job as a nanny or a cleaner, something temporary. And we'll keep looking for your uncle. Who knows, he might turn up." Tears welled up in Ines's eyes as she squeezed German's hand resting on the steering wheel. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "Let's not talk about it," he said, embarrassed, slightly turning away. "Let's go. Victor's probably hungry, and he needs his medicine." Thus, they returned to German's house. Victor had been waiting by the window, coughing occasionally, watching for their car to return. When he saw German parking, he threw open the door and ran to meet them. Seeing Ines and Alejandro with him, he even seemed happy. Clearly, he didn't want to be alone. "Dad, are you back for long?" he asked. "I already watched all the TV, played on the phone, and almost fell asleep." "Yeah, sorry it took so long," German said. "We drove around the city, tried to find Ines's uncle, but couldn't." So they'll be staying with us for a while until they figure things out. You don't mind, do you? I don't mind, Victor shrugged, eyeing little Alejandro, who was pulling faces at him. Maybe they'll even teach me how to deal with babies? I'll show you, Ines chimed in, though he's already walking, so not exactly a baby anymore. Yeah, Victor grinned. But can he talk? Right now only mama and give, but he'll probably learn more words soon, Ines said proudly. And so began a new chapter in German and Victor's lives, living together with the young Roma woman Ines and her 1-year-old son Alejandro, and, as the coming days would show, it became a much more significant event than German could have anticipated. In the morning, German went to the clinic for his shift and returned late in the evening. Victor was feeling better, though his cough lingered. During the day, Ines had cleaned up the living room and kitchen, taking on the housework willingly. When German came home, she greeted him with a bowl of hot soup and a shy smile. Wow! German whistled. I told you I wasn't asking for rent, but I have to admit, this is a pleasant surprise. Thank you, Ines said, lowering her eyes. I hope you like it. I really tried. Did Victor eat too? Yes, Victor's voice came from the living room. I helped chop the vegetables. I can cook now too, Dad. Don't think I'm lazy. I'm sure you're not, German smiled, looking at Ines standing there shyly, but it's really nice to come home and have someone waiting with dinner. I'm not used to it anymore, to be honest. While he was eating, Ines was putting Alejandro to sleep, rocking him in her arms. Meanwhile, Victor was telling his father that he barely had a fever and that they had spent the whole day reading books and playing with an old building set left over from his early childhood. Later, he and Ines had sewn a new curtain because the old one had torn. By the way, Dad, she can sew, Victor added. She said she learned it in the camp. She said she could even make clothes to order if someone needed it. German nodded, swallowing a spoonful of soup. That's great. Maybe we can find her some customers. I'll try asking around. A lot of people in town need seamstresses to hem pants, shorten dresses, that kind of thing. Each day, Ines and Alejandro were settling into the house more and more. Alejandro ran tirelessly through the corridors. Although stomping around was hard work, German's house was spacious with many rooms. While he was recovering, Victor enjoyed sitting with the little boy, helping to entertain him, giving him toys, pulling him around on a wooden rocking horse that German had once crafted for him. The house was increasingly filled with the sounds of children's laughter, Alejandro's and Victor's alike, as Victor did his best to amuse the little one. But one evening, during the second week of their living together, the very morning described in the title of this story took place. The night before, a strong wind had blown, and German's heart had begun to ache, an old signal of bad weather. He also noticed that Victor's cough had worsened, requiring extra inhalations. Ines remained calm but seemed to sense something. A couple of times, she asked, "Should we call a doctor?" German, being a doctor himself, confidently replied that he could handle it. "The main thing is to monitor the fever," he said. That night, German barely slept. Victor coughed so hard he was having spasms and could hardly breathe. German had to give him another anti-inflammatory shot and hold him over steam. Only toward dawn did the boy finally doze off. Exhausted, German lay down beside him on the bed, intending to close his eyes just for 15 minutes. And then, just before sunrise, commotion, shouting. German jumped up as if scalded. "Is Victor here?" He barely had time to think when he saw Ines standing in the doorway of his son's room, pale and with tears in her eyes. "German! Wake up! What is this?" she cried. German's heart clenched. He looked at Victor's bed. The boy was gone. The blanket was thrown aside. The window was ajar. Where could he have gone? "He's sick," panic flooded German. He turned to Ines. "Where's Victor?" "I don't know. I came in and he wasn't here, and then..." She fell silent, pointing to the wall. German followed her gaze and saw strange marks on the wallpaper, like wet handprints and knee prints, leading toward the window. Near the windowsill were drops that looked like blood. What the hell? Flashed through his mind, though he told himself there must be a logical explanation. Still, he was terrified. Did Victor try to climb out the window in his sleep? Was he delirious and got hurt? Or is this someone else's blood? He noticed other details too, a small bowl on the nightstand with dark dried drops in it, rags soaked in dark crimson liquid lying on the floor. What the? Thought German. German, Ines whispered, I came to check on Victor. She couldn't finish. German ran to the window, flinging it wide open. Cold air rushed in. Outside, it was just beginning to dawn. The wind carried the smell of dampness and melting snow. But there were no footprints under the window, the wind had erased them. Panicked, German tore himself away from the window and rushed through the hallway, checking every room. No sign of his son. He was frantic, nearly losing his mind with fear and confusion. Maybe he went to the foyer? German muttered. Or maybe to the neighbors. I checked. He's not there, Ines said, clutching her elbow with a trembling hand. I was so scared something terrible had happened. Damn it! German swore, something he almost never did. How could he have gone outside in his condition? He had a high fever. Just then, a small voice came from behind them. Dad, what are you looking for? German and Ines turned sharply. At the foot of the attic stairs stood Victor, disheveled, wearing pajamas, holding a mug of tea. He looked at them, puzzled. Victor! German exclaimed. How did you get there? We thought you were gone. The boy coughed, covering his mouth with his hand. I couldn't sleep, so I went up to the attic to look for old photo albums. I wanted something to do. Then I came down to get some water. Why? But wait, German struggled to catch his breath. Your bed, the blanket thrown off, blood-like stains on the wall. What? Victor gave a short laugh, which quickly turned into a cough. What blood? German rushed back to the boy's room and leaned over the bowl on the nightstand. He dipped a finger into the dark liquid and smelled it. Suddenly, he realized it wasn't blood. It looked and smelled more like thick, dried paint or possibly juice. Dad, Victor said, peeking over his shoulder. That's gouache. I was painting yesterday. I must have knocked the jar over when I fell asleep. It spilled on the floor and walls. I forgot to clean it up. Sorry. Ines exhaled with relief, while German sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling all the adrenaline drain from him. He glanced at the open window. Victor must have opened it during the night to air out the smell of paint, not to escape. The marks on the wallpaper were from the spilled gouache. Victor must have stepped or leaned on it in the dark, leaving the prints. But why so many stains, like a dragon's bloody neck? German muttered, still half in shock. I tried to clean it with a cloth, Victor shrugged, placing his mug on the nightstand and rubbing his eyes, but I think I just smeared it around. Then I started shivering, so I lay down and fell asleep. Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to scare you. German tilted his head back, closing his eyes, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and residual anger. For a moment, he had truly believed something terrible had happened to his son. Ines wiped cold sweat from her forehead, holding a wailing Alejandro, who had woken up from the noise. Thank God, she whispered. I was so scared. You were just as scared as me, German agreed. All right, Victor, go wash up. I'll change the bed linen. We'll wash the walls later. Next time, paint on the floor or in the living room where there's a canvas. Got it, the boy nodded guiltily, moving toward the door. German stood and put a hand on his son's shoulder. How are you feeling? Still have a fever? A little, but not bad, Victor tried to smile. Sorry, Dad. I really didn't think red gouache would scare anyone. I didn't even notice I spilled it. All right. It's fine, German sighed. But from now on, tell me if you're going up to the attic. And don't leave the window open at night when you're sick." Feeling the tension finally lifting, Ines said softly, "It turned out to be so much simpler. Maybe I panicked for nothing, but I really thought something terrible had happened." "You did the right thing," German assured her. Anyone would have been terrified in this situation. Still, he realized how incredibly grateful he was that his son was safe. The feverish night, the threat of complications, all of it weighed heavily on him. And then the blood-like stains. But in the end, it had all turned out logical and harmless. Had someone written about it in a newspaper, the headline might have been, "A gypsy girl with a baby knocks on a surgeon's door in a blizzard. What he finds in the morning will make you gasp." But it all ended naturally and sensibly. The stains were just ordinary gouache, and his son had not disappeared, he had simply gone to the attic. However, this episode marked a turning point in German and Ines's relationship. German realized how much he had grown used to having someone nearby, someone who cared about the house, worried about his son, and was afraid for him. After Blanca's death, he had done everything alone, working, keeping the house, raising Victor. Of course, there were friends and his mother, but mostly, the house had been filled with silence. Now, a woman had appeared who, even if only temporarily, brought fresh colors into his life, and not just the red of spilled gouache. And Ines, perhaps for the first time, felt that she and her child were offered not just shelter, but genuine care, kindness, and protection. A few more weeks passed, and Victor had fully recovered. His cough had practically disappeared. German began disappearing into work again, taking difficult surgical shifts at the local hospital, often coming home well past midnight. However, now he no longer had to worry about Victor being alone. Ines took care of the boy, cooked, helped with housework, and did the laundry. Alejandro already felt at home, running all over the house, sometimes breaking Victor's toys. But Victor didn't get upset. On the contrary, he was happy about Alejandro's liveliness. Over the weekend, German promised to take Ines to visit a friend of his who made wedding dresses and sometimes hired assistants. Ines was delighted. It could be her first opportunity to earn her own money. She felt embarrassed living off German's generosity, even though she was very grateful to him. Marta, German explained as they drove to the workshop, has been looking for someone to help with sewing costumes. She often gets bulk orders from the market, so things need to be done quickly and neatly. If everything works out, you could work from home or at her workshop. Ines listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Alejandro's warm little face as he dozed in his child's seat. She had told German many times that she didn't know how to repay him. He would just joke about her making pancakes or flatbreads, but she knew she would have to find a way to thank him properly. At Marta's workshop, Ines demonstrated her skills. She could sew straight stitches both by hand and on a sewing machine, which, fortunately, was similar to the one she had used before. Marta appreciated her abilities and gave her some trial tasks, which Ines completed successfully. In the end, she was hired for part-time work, paid per completed order. For Ines, it felt like a real celebration. "Now I'll have at least some steady income," she told German as they drove back, "and I'll be able to rent a place. Even just a small room, so we don't get in your way." German glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You're not in the way. And Victor enjoys Alejandro's company. I don't think you'll find anything suitable with a child on such a tight budget. Maybe you should stay with us for now?" She lowered her eyes. "But I can't live forever in someone else's home. You yourself said you have work, a son." "Exactly. I have work, a son, and not much time to take care of the house. Since you arrived, there's been warmth and coziness here. Honestly, I didn't realize how much I needed that. So don't rush to leave. When the right opportunity comes, you can find your own place if you want. Meanwhile, make use of what we have." Ines smiled a little sadly. "You're like a real knight. No one has ever protected me like this." German grew embarrassed, shifted gears, and pretended to focus on the road. Inside, he was beginning to experience unfamiliar feelings. He increasingly found himself looking at Ines not just as someone he needed to help, but as a woman he genuinely liked. She was young, though life had clearly worn her down a bit, yet she still retained freshness and sincerity. German's son also gravitated toward her, sensing her kindness. Alejandro became like a younger brother to Victor. German bought him toys, a stroller, and a sled for winter outings. Day by day, a new family was forming, albeit without any legal formality. The neighbors soon noticed that German had taken in some gypsies, sparking some gossip. One neighbor, Soledad Campos, made a face when she met German. "Be careful, dear," she said. "Gypsies might steal something and sell it off." German only smiled. "Soledad, if they steal something, then we'll talk. For now, they're helping me." "Well, it's your business, but don't say I didn't warn you," she muttered, shaking her head distrustfully. Naturally, these rumors reached Ines, and it made her uncomfortable. But German tried to reassure her. People love to judge based on stereotypes. The important thing is that we know the truth. Meanwhile, Ines regularly took sewing orders from Marta and sometimes helped another of German's acquaintances with inexpensive embroidery on towels. The money wasn't much, but it was something. Then, one evening, German came home from a grueling shift and noticed that something in the house had changed. A soft light glowed in the kitchen, and a vase of flowers stood on the table. He had no idea where Ines had found flowers at this time of year. The aroma of stewed meat filled the house. In the living room, Victor had laid out something like a mat, where he and Alejandro were playing with toy cars. "Look, an accident." "Boom!" Victor exclaimed, cheerful and energetic. His cough was a thing of the past. Ines approached German with a smile and took his bag from him. "You're so tired," she said. "I made dinner. I learned a Bulgarian recipe and mixed it with some of our Romani flavors. Please, try it." German went to the kitchen and sank heavily into a chair. Suddenly, a wave of coziness and peace washed over him, something he hadn't felt since his wife had passed away. He looked at Ines. She wore a simple scarf, her hair braided, and she radiated homely warmth. It was nothing like the lonely life he had gotten used to in recent years. "Thank you," he said. "It's been a very tough day." Victor came up behind him, sat down, and smiled. "Dad, Ines taught me how to sew something. We made a soft toy for Alejandro." "Really? That's cool." "Show me," German said with interest. Victor showed him a homemade bunny made of fabric scraps. "It's a bit crooked, but it'll do," Victor laughed. "That's awesome, well done," German praised him and added thoughtfully, "I'm really glad you've bonded." "Of course," Victor shrugged. "I thought it would be harder. But Alejandro is funny, and Ines is nice." Ines blushed at his words, not daring to meet German's eyes. Perhaps she too sensed there was already something more between them than simple hospitality. German felt it as well but was hesitant to act on it. He didn't know how she truly felt and didn't want to put her in an awkward position. Nevertheless, the warm evenings spent together, even as an unofficial little family, inevitably drew them closer. One day, after Victor had gone outside to play and Alejandro had fallen asleep, German and Ines were left alone in the kitchen. She sat on a stool, absent-mindedly rearranging cloth pieces prepared for sewing, while German washed the dishes. Only the steady hum of the stove and the dripping faucet broke the silence. "Ines," German said, setting down a plate, "I honestly can't imagine how we lived without you here. You've brought so much warmth to our home." She looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You've done so much for me too, German. And for Alejandro. Without you, we would have been lost." He dried his hands with a towel, turned to her. "Maybe," he hesitated, wanting to say maybe you shouldn't leave at all, but it felt too soon. "Maybe you could stay longer if you don't find another place. It would be a big help to me and Victor." She understood the meaning behind his words and answered softly, "I'm glad we're not a burden. But people will talk." "Let them talk," he shrugged. "They already do. I don't care." Do you? Ines shrank back slightly, lowering her eyes. I'm afraid of what they'll say. That I seduced you to get a place to live, to get money. That's all prejudice. I'm an adult man. I do what I want. And if I want to live with you under the same roof, no one will tell me otherwise. She smiled, but there was sadness in her smile. You say that. But sometimes I wonder why you're so kind to us. Maybe you have pain in your heart and just want someone to fill the emptiness. German froze. She had guessed right. He closed his eyes and sighed. The image of his late wife Blanca instantly rose in his mind. Yes, he missed her. Time had healed the sharpest wounds, but the memory remained. And now there was Ines, different from Blanca, yet able to touch parts of his soul that had long been dormant. Maybe so, he admitted quietly, but that doesn't mean I don't value you for who you are. Ines nodded, brushing away a small tear. You know, I'm not ready for anything serious yet, she said. I need to come to terms with the fact that my life can change now. I'm very afraid to trust because I've been betrayed more than once. German nodded. He respected her feelings. After all, their acquaintance had begun under extreme circumstances, the storm, fear for the child, poverty. A person cannot switch into happiness instantly. Everything needs time and care. All right, he said. I won't rush you. Just know you can stay here as long as you need. You are part of our home now. She smiled gratefully, feeling how much these words meant to her. She no longer had to worry daily about where she would sleep. She could work, raise Alejandro, and not fear being thrown out. And later, whatever would happen between her and German would happen. Time passed. The snow had long melted, the storms were a memory. Victor was going to school, and Alejandro was already confidently running around the yard, clanging buckets and toy cars. Ines sewed for several hours a day, completing orders for Marta. In the evenings, they would gather around the table for dinner, chatting about their days. The house echoed with children's laughter, new curtains and tablecloths sewn by Ines appeared. Their neighbor, Soledad, seeing how happy the children were in the yard, gradually softened. Well, maybe not all gypsies are bad, she muttered one day when German brought her some medicine. One evening, when German returned from the hospital, he saw Victor and Ines sitting on the porch, looking through an old photo album. Alejandro was playing nearby with a ball, sometimes crawling onto Ines's lap. German listened to their conversation. That's Dad and Mom, Victor said, pointing at a photo where German and Blanca smiled, holding hands. I was really little then. You look a lot like your father, Ines said. You both have fair hair and light eyes. I remember her voice, Victor said, studying the picture. But her face, only vaguely. I do remember her laughing when I hurt myself on the pine cones in the yard. She said, silly boy, you shouldn't run there barefoot. Ines gently wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders. I think she was very kind. I'm sorry you lost her so early. Victor sighed and looked up. But now I have you, Ines. And Alejandro. I'm not so sad anymore. She smiled, and at that moment German came closer and touched his son's hand. Hey. What are you talking about? Victor blushed slightly. About Mom. And that, well, now I'm not alone. A tender feeling stirred in German. He patted Victor's head and glanced at Ines, his whole being filled with gratitude for the warmth and sense of home she had brought into their lives. Alejandro, seeing German, cried joyfully. Uncle, and raised his arms. German bent down, picked him up, and the little one nestled into his neck. Yes, thought German, we were meant to meet. More time passed before Ines was ready for a more open conversation about the future. She still dreamed of finding her relatives but understood they might have moved to another region. German supported her search, posting announcements on local sites, asking around. So far, there were no results. One evening, while Victor and Alejandro were asleep, Ines was finishing sewing a tablecloth. German was drinking coffee, watching her profile lit softly by the floor lamp. How much longer will you put up with me? Ines asked with a slight smile, not looking up from her sewing. As long as you want, German answered. Don't you get bored with the routine? No, I like the quiet life. And Alejandro is happy. He has a yard, toys, friends. Before, when we lived with the caravan, things weren't always good. Maybe you want to get your documents in order? German suggested. So you can work officially in the atelier. I can help with the paperwork. You probably don't have full registration. Ines frowned slightly. Yes, I have a problem with my passport. I lost it about a year ago. I had so many worries, I never got around to it. If you help me, I'll be very grateful. Of course, I'll help, German said. I already found out. You need to submit an application and have your birth certificate. Do you have it? She nodded. Yes, it's with my uncle. But... She sighed heavily. I don't know where he is now. Then we'll request a duplicate from the archive. It's manageable. A weight seemed to lift from her soul. It felt like German was ready to take on all her burdens, freeing her from fear. Yet she didn't want to be passive or dependent. That's why she worked hard sewing, contributing to food and bills however she could. Gradually, their relationship grew closer. They talked not just about daily matters but about their pasts. Ines spoke of her parents, whom she barely remembered, of her nomadic life, how she was married off at 17 and eventually ran away. German told her about studying to become a surgeon, meeting Blanca, their shared dream of opening a clinic, a dream left unfulfilled. One day, while Victor and Alejandro played in the yard, German set aside his newspaper and said, I've wanted to tell you for a while, you know, I really like you. Truly. And I have feelings for you beyond gratitude. She sat across from him, fiddling with a handkerchief, her face flushed, but she didn't look away. I guessed, she said softly. And I feel good with you too, German. I feel like I've become part of your family. German reached out and touched her fingers. Maybe we can try living as a real family? She looked into his eyes cautiously. I don't want to rush things. But if you're ready to accept me, and Alejandro, and all our difficulties. I am, German said firmly. They embraced, a tender, unhurried hug. There was no passion, only deep warmth and acceptance. As if two people who had searched for a long time had finally found each other. Thus began their relationship, if you could call such a calm, gentle coming together a romance. For Victor, it wasn't surprising. He already saw Ines as a second mother, though he never called her that. He noticed how close she and German had become. Alejandro, always cheerful, eagerly reached for German. Soon German suggested that Ines and Alejandro move into a room upstairs, closer to him and Victor. She agreed. They spent their evenings together, putting the children to bed. Sometimes Alejandro and Victor would fall asleep in the same room, and Ines would stay nearby with German. Neighbors noticed the changes too. Ines rarely wore her old patterned skirts anymore, favoring simple home clothes. She laughed on the streets when shopping. She no longer looked like the lonely, frightened woman who once knocked on German's door in the storm. When German's mother learned about these changes, she frowned at first. Son, don't rush. You hardly know her. What if she's just pretending? But when she visited and saw how Ines cared for German and Victor, how little Alejandro happily climbed into her arms, and how clean and cozy the house was, her skepticism softened. Maybe this really is your path, she said when leaving. German and Ines continued building their life together. Some awkwardness remained. For example, Ines still addressed him formally in front of neighbors, which made everyone laugh. Gradually, she learned to say you instead of sir when they were alone. Sometimes she felt insecure, worrying she wasn't good enough for him. He had a higher education and a respected profession, while she came from a poor nomadic childhood and had an unfinished education. But German would just joke. But you know how to handle fabrics and sing beautiful songs, things I could never do. We have a lot to teach each other. Summer was approaching. The blizzard from the night Ines and Alejandro arrived already felt like a distant memory. Victor had moved up a grade, growing closer to Alejandro, who was developing fast, starting to say simple words like give, papa, mama. One sunny day, German suggested they visit a country house he owned but hadn't used since Blanca's death. They went, with Ines admiring the fields and forests along the way, Alejandro shouting Papa, Papa, at the cows, while Victor happily explained everything. When they arrived, they found an overgrown garden and a crumbling fence. But the house still looked picturesque, and the air was fresh. "It's so beautiful here," Ines said at once. German realized that if they wanted to spend summers here, they'd need to do a lot of repairs. While Victor and Alejandro ran around the yard, Ines hugged German tightly and said, "Thank you for giving me a chance. And giving my son a chance for a normal life. I'm grateful that on that stormy night, we knocked on your door." He hugged her back and answered, "And I'm grateful that you didn't walk past. That's how we live now." And though they were still far from official family status, not thinking about weddings or formalities, in every way that mattered, they were already a family, each with a place, each caring for the others. That night, when Ines and Alejandro had knocked so desperately at his door during the storm, German could never have imagined how much happiness and new meaning would come into his life with them. And though some people looked sideways and gossiped, everything was simple and logical. Two lonely souls, each with a child, needing warmth and support, founded in each other. No mysticism, no dark plots as some love to invent about gypsies. Just real life, where kindness met gratitude and grew into love. Thus ended this story, which could fit into a newspaper headline, but in reality stretched over many months, becoming a long, bright path for two people who had once been strangers but had now become a family.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.